quick little update here from northern Israel about the situation between Israel and Syria and how it's affecting geopolitics at the moment. Right now, we got Israel having made a very bold move. Some would say it's aggression, some would say it's colonization, it's part of the greater Israel plan. Others will just be realistic and say, no, this is Israel defending itself, making sure that weapons of mass destruction and other weapons don't fall into the hands of some crazy Islamist extremist group, especially those that are still affiliated with Al-Qaeda and who are openly saying, first Damascus, next we're coming to Jerusalem, and having all these kind of crazy things that they are saying and doing to demonstrate that. Right? They're making videos or popping them on all the socials and promoting this jihadist mentality that they want to come and attack Israel and take over Israel and destroy Israel and kill all the Jews and kill all the Israelis and all the infidels. And anyone that they don't kill is only because those people are basically slaves, right? Or second-class citizens in one way or another, but mostly slaves. That's how they view the big change in Syria. And so when you hear people complaining, oh, what is Israel doing blowing up these military sites in Syria? What business do they have doing that? It's not their war. They should stay out of it. Right? Well, keep in mind, what are they blowing up? First of all, they blew up a bunch of known weapon stores, like massive weapon stores, from an army that abandoned its post and left it to the hands of a bunch of so-called rebel groups that are terrorists by any other name, who formed an alliance to oust a government. Like, can I be sympathetic to the Syrian people who fought hard and suffered tremendously over the past 54 years, whatever? Yeah, absolutely. What human being with a brain wouldn't? But at the same time, that doesn't mean I have to be sympathetic to the people who are vowing to kill me and everyone here in this country just for being alive. And it doesn't mean that we have to let weapons sitting out in effectively no man's land at the moment in Syria, which is not governed by any particular entity, even though one of those groups in the rebel alliance, if you want to call it that, named a sort of interim prime minister until sometime in 2025, right? They've taken over, they've been handed the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, by the former prime minister, right? The prime minister under Bashar Assad from the Ba'ath Party. And so they've given the keys to the kingdom to this new group led by this guy, Jolani or Golani. His name comes from the word Golani, or Golan. And that was his nom de guerre. And he apparently stopped using it and is now using his, birth name, I guess, to change his persona even more, so people will, terror wash the guy or whitewash the guy to pretend like he's not the terrorist that he is. Now, has he said a lot of things that people in the West like to hear? Yeah, he has. Has he done a lot of the things that people in the West like to see? Well, he's done at least some of them. He hasn't gone on a bloody rampage against all the people that don't happen to be of his particular perverted view of his religion. But does that mean that he's entirely given up on his violent tendencies and his genocidal views of how to treat people who aren't his particular ideology? No, it doesn't mean that at all. He, on purpose, said he was changing his stance because of the optics, right? When he cut off his relations with Al-Qaeda and IS officially. But he's still allied with them or with various groups of them, branches of theirs, for this attack. And again, all credit goes to the fact that they defeated a terrible dictator and got rid of his disgusting army and freed lots of people who were held in the most inhumane conditions in prisons across Syria. And all credit goes to the fact that they have not started harming Christians and Alawites and people of other faiths, minorities, Druze, Kurds, etc. But how long will that last now that they have control of the whatever infrastructure is there, the civil infrastructure, and they're beginning to take control and they're beginning to try to consolidate power. Maybe they'll even change their party name, because the guy even said he's going to probably change the name of HTS to something else, because it achieved its purpose, right? So from his point of view, he wants to change his name, because the movement was the Liberation of Iraq movement. Well, now they've liberated Iraq. So from his point of view, he said he wants to give it a new name, possibly. Well, whether he does or not, you could put a wig on a pig, it's still just a pig. Okay? And just because you change the name on your and the flag you use and the name of your party doesn't mean it's a different party. If they have the same ideals, the same values, if they change nothing about their character, if they don't actually demonstrate that they're serious about peace. Like, yes, Israel destroyed a few hundred military sites, including a whole bunch of their naval assets, right? The Syrian Navy. Well, first of all, the incoming powers don't have any claim over that stuff. Now, they can claim today that they do because they've been handed the keys to the kingdom by the former prime minister. Ain't nobody recognizing that government yet. And even if people do, so what? Israel has the right to defend itself and to protect itself and make sure that these crazy people who have an ideological bent on destroying Israel, and they're saying it openly, Israel has a right to make sure that these people don't get access to as much of the weaponry as possible. And Israel militarily, you can say it doesn't have the right. It's fine. It doesn't. Let's say it doesn't have the right. Okay. So Israel doesn't have the right. Yeah. Okay. So Israel made an aggressive move and attacked a whole bunch of partly illegal weapon stores, if there were any WMDs there without permission, and partly legal weapon stores that it simply didn't, which at the time, there was no army of Syria. There were just rebel groups of different factions who hadn't even officially taken over any powers from the outgoing prime minister. So these were just literally weapons out in the middle of nowhere, finders keepers kind of situation. And rather than letting random people take those weapons, Israel decidedly did the world a favor, and it did itself a favor, and took those weapons out of commission. By the way, those weapons also threatened Lebanon, and those weapons also threatened Turkey, and those weapons also threatened Iraq, right? And those weapons also threatened Jordan. Those were weapons that could be used on anyone. So by Israel taking them out, they did a lot of countries a favor in the immediate vicinity, and they did a world a favor by preventing said weapons to be used as a threat that might up some kind of brinksmanship on a wider level. So they did really the world a favor. Yes, Israel did itself a favor. But that favor for Israel also did a favor for the world. Right? Immediately the region of the Middle East, but more broadly, the larger world that is affected by events in the region. Why? Because of oil, because of interests in Israel and in the immediate countries that surround it, like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. Saudi Arabia is technically a few kilometers away off the southern border by Aqaba. So it doesn't technically border Israel, but it's quite close. You know, Syria, Lebanon, these countries all border Israel. And there are massive geopolitical interests in them. whether you realize it or not, right? What happens in Saudi Arabia is very much important to the world. And what happens in Jordan and Lebanon and Syria and Israel affects what happens in Saudi Arabia. Big time. And the Saudis would like to have peace with Israel. They have no interest in having a war with Israel. The leader, the active leader of Saudi Arabia has said multiple times, he's not interested in this whole what's going on here. He'd rather it would just not be an issue. And the easiest way for that to happen is for them to put this issue behind them. And the easiest way for that to happen, right, is for an agreement. So, keep in mind that when Israel took out these assets in Syria, right, what was it taking out? It was taking out mainly weapons that could damage or harm, obviously, Israel, but also minority communities throughout Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, right? Turkey. It did huge favors to a lot of communities. People forget when Nasrallah was taken out in September, all the lefties and useful idiots were saying, oh, how dare Israel kill the leader Nasrallah? Now that makes Netanyahu a target legitimately. And they were saying, like, how could he not be seen as a hero now, this and that, all this garbage. It's sort of praising this idiot, violent idiot because he could have not led a life like that. He chose a dark path. And that's idiotic, especially if you have half a brain cell between your ears. But yeah, cultish brainwashing will do a lot to a person. Violent extremism will do a lot to a person. And power and money and fame and infamy and ego, all that stuff will do a lot. It's not good to a person, right? So, once again, we see, little old Israel doing the world huge favors and just getting criticized for it. You see Israel getting criticized by the UN for what? For taking over the posts that the Syrian army abandoned in the Golan Heights, right? The UN DOF, right? The observer force that they have there in the demilitarized zone. They coordinated, apparently, the movement of Israel entering the demilitarized zone and taking over those posts, right? And what did they do? The UN then went ahead and criticized Israel for doing that, even though it was coordinated, apparently. And the UN has not denied that it was coordinated. So like I said yesterday, it was just more political talking nonsense from the talking show, from the clown show. Demonstrable nonsense, right? So, anyway, what this means from a broader perspective is that Israel has done the yeoman's work for the international community to keep it safe. Ferrari or Lamborghini, Ferrari or Bugatti. I don't know. I'm Ferrari, not Ferrari. Israel has done the yeoman's work for the international community to keep it safe. Because of what it's doing in Syria. And instead of getting credit for what it's doing, it is getting the opposite of that. And that is to be expected because we see that happening time and time again. And oh boy. Yeah. So what is Israel doing exactly now that it has control of these weapons? And is that good or bad for Israel? Right? That's the main question people are asking. Like, what is Israel's plan now that it's taken out all these sites and whacked all these moles inside of Syria? What's the point? What is the point? Why did Israel take out 300 military targets across Syria? Well, now Israel is in a far better position to negotiate with whoever eventually takes over to say, okay, we'll give you back this land on condition that X, Y, and Z. You stop being aggressive towards us. You start saying things like, we live in peace side by side next to Israel. We want to build economic, cultural, and other ties with Israel and live in peace and prosperity side by side with Israel. So all in all, you can say what Israel did was actually bloody brilliant. And I mean that, right? It's not often that I will say, yay, let's take more land. I don't agree with that. Like the state is the state is the state at the moment. The shape of the state is what it is. But I also don't agree with just letting a bunch of terrorists take control of masses of weapons because they could very, very easily use against Israel. That would be foolish. Right? That would be insane. To put it mildly. So rather than do the foolish thing, Israel has done the wise thing, which many people will not recognize as wise. They'll say, no, Israel committed more acts of barbarism and will accuse Israel of a million things without any evidence, but they'll still make the accusation. Did Israel kill tons of people in blowing up these sites? Right, the naval base at Latakia, which many to bomb it. You're right. Move. Ships move. Syrian boats, 650 kilometers away, is no different than if it had taken out those same Syrian ships had they been half a kilometer away from Israel's border. The fact is, those boats were boats. They floated. Now they sinketh. They sank. Right? They are underwater, and their capability to be weapons is eliminated. They are now hunks of junk. It was, in fact, very important, and so important that even the United States, which supposedly supported this whole thing in Syria, but there's really no evidence to suggest it completely. Like, yes, there's some evidence, but not like they were running the show or anything. But even the US said very clearly that they support what Israel did in removing those targets and making sure that the Syrians, whoever is taking over now, does not have access to all those weapons, which the U.S. also considers very much a threat. And I'm saying the U.S., I mean the State Department bureaucrats. Those are not people who tend to say, oh yeah, sure, Israel has the right to just attack whatever it wants. Those are, in fact, the people that usually sound a lot like the UN and say, no, Israel should negotiate and talk and not use force. But even in this case, they said, no, Israel was right to take this outpost on the Golan and was right to liquidate all of those sites that had military equipment that were just abandoned by the Syrian army. So whether or not Israel is operating inside of Syria is moot. Whether they have any special forces in Syria taken out, it doesn't really matter, right? If they have special forces in Syria, most likely they're just painting targets for the Air Force to drop on. It may be true, maybe they're doing other things, who knows, right? But taking out those targets was key, and good on Israel for doing it. They made the whole region a lot safer, at least for the short term, right? Now let's see what happens with Iran. If they're going to try to take back a significant position in Syria by somehow getting any of the rebel groups, the Shia-friendly ones, to team up with them, or whatever's left of Hezbollah, if they can figure out how to get them back into Syria, because right now Hezbollah has tucked its tail between its legs, obviously, and ran out of Syria when they realized the Assad regime was going down, because they're among the many brutal butchers that he used to kill 500,000 people during the Civil War. So, anyway, interesting times. Stay safe, y'all. Happy days. And may we all have real and lasting peace and prosperity sooner rather than later. Shalom.